So I'm going to say something that you won't hear very many pastors or preachers say from stage, and that's that I have doubted what I believe a lot in my life. You expect someone who is, a pastor or whatever to be like, yeah, I've always known what I believed, and I believed since I was a little kid, I've been raised in church, and I was a believer from an early age, but I doubted a lot about what I believe growing up. And I just want to give you guys a little bit of some background on me. So my family, my grandfather on my mom's side is a pastor. He just retired, and he was a pastor at a Southern Baptist church for 60 years. Really long time. Both of my uncles on my mom's side, pastors. Multiple, second uncles or, cousins, or I've got an uncle on my dad's side. All of them had been doing ministry. And so I was raised in a very, very Christian family that was also very, very Southern Baptist. And so I was raised in the Southern Baptist church since my whole life. And, I became a believer when I was a little kid and got baptized and, recommitted my faith to Jesus when I was 14. And made it really serious for, it's not just like, oh, I was raised to believe this, but no, this is what I really believe. And, growing up, I was in the same kind of church. And guys, I was raised in the way that, there's a thing, and I can make fun of Baptists because, I was in the Baptist church for my whole life and have so many family members who are. But, some Baptist churches can be so... they have this mentality, and not all of them believe this because one Baptist church is not the same as another. But in the church I grew up in, the way I was raised, it felt like, well, other people from other denominations are wrong, and because they have a different church, they must believe different things. But of course, I'm the one who's right? And so that was the mentality that I had growing up. And then I had an experience in my teenage years where God revealed himself to me in a way that growing up I had believed didn't happen. The church that I was raised in, talked about, they didn't talk about things like miracles. They didn't talk about things like visions or God speaking to people through dreams or miraculous ways. And God revealed himself to me in a miraculous way, whereas I was growing up believing, well, that didn't happen. So I had to ask myself, what do I really believe? And so I had this whole journey where, long story short, it just ended up being a bad experience at the church I was raised in. My family ended up leaving my freshman year of high school. And we went to another church and had another bad experience there. And in my mind, I just started growing a chip on my shoulder against, how I was raised and the church that I was raised in. And so I just kind of had a chip on my shoulder. I kind of had a little bit of a grudge or whatever, and I was just like, all these people over here are wrong, and all these people over here are right. And I was very argumentative. And, about the time that I was 18 and 19 going into college, I was the person that was arguing about God and about belief and the Bible and all these things. And I had totally, what they call, swung the pendulum. So I was all the way over here on one end, and I swung the pendulum and went all the way over here to the opposite end, which was a charismatic Christianity. And so I had swung it from very, this stuff doesn't happen, to all these people over here are wrong and all these people over here are right. And then I had another experience my freshman year where I was exposed to the fact that, you know what, the church is kind of messed up all over, and there's no perfect church. And it kind of shattered the idea that I had in my mind of everyone in this group is right, and everyone in this group is wrong. And I was in this place of just questioning God and the Bible and everything and saying, what do I even believe? And, it was through, the Lord leading me that he healed the hurt that was in my heart. And he brought me from the university I was at, that was a charismatic school, which is Oral Roberts up in Tulsa. And I felt led to go to Dallas Baptist University, which I didn't want to go to because I was raised Baptist and had a bad experience, and that's Baptist, and I don't want anything to do with Baptists, But the Lord called me to go there, even though I didn't want to go. But I obeyed him. And it was there that the Lord healed my heart of a lot of the hurt and showed me that it's like, hey, yeah, there's stuff that's messed up all over, but there's also a lot of good all over too. And it's not as much about, one person being right and one person being wrong. And it's, there's things that we believe and there's things that we can disagree on and things we have conversations. But it was shaking my faith. And I went through a long period in that time where I doubted what I believed. And, I had a foundation. I knew that I believed in God, but I had a lot of questions. And I was that guy that, after a preacher had a sermon, I always had a question for him. Or when I was going to school and, doing theology and Bible classes at DBU, I always had a question for the professor because I was just questioning and hungry to learn and wanting to just know. And what I found when I was in that period of questioning what I believed and why, what I found is that I'm not alone. I'm not the only person who has questioned whether Christianity is true or whether one set of beliefs within Christianity is true or one's not. And what I found out is basically everybody does. It's just that certain people don't want to talk about it because they don't want to feel ashamed for having questions or wrestling with God. And here's the deal. As I've looked through Scripture, almost every major biblical character questioned or doubted God. And what I found is that I'm in pretty good company for having questions and doubts about my faith because all these people that we celebrate as heroes of faith had questions and doubted. And so the question that I have for us tonight is, how are we supposed to feel when we doubt? How are we supposed to handle the questions that we have? Should we be ashamed of it? Should we not? And obviously, because my story I'm sharing, we shouldn't feel ashamed of our doubts. We shouldn't say, I just can't, I don't want to bring up what I'm questioning in my small group because everybody's going to judge me. So how are we supposed to handle the doubts that we have? And so I want to look at one hero of the faith that is in Scripture, and his name is Jacob. Jacob is my namesake, and he's who my parents named me after, and I got really sad when I was at the church I was raised in. They gave little certificates out that had your name and what the biblical meaning of that name was. And if you don't know, the meaning of Jacob means supplanter or heel grabber, meaning he's a trickster, he's a thief, and a liar. And they gave me this little certificate that had that on there, and I was like, I don't feel very good. But Jacob's also this hero of faith, right? So if you have your Bibles, I want you to go ahead and turn to the book of Genesis, chapter 32. Genesis 32, and we're going to start reading in verse 22. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at Jacob, who's mentioned in Hebrews' Hall of Faith, and yet he doubted God a lot. So before we read this, I want to paint the picture of the story so far in Jacob's life. So Jacob was twins with a guy named Esau. So Jacob's grandfather was Abraham. Abraham was called by God, and he said, I'm going to use your family to bless the entire world. Abraham had a son named Isaac, and then Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob. And Jacob was like the younger by like a split second, and he came out grabbing Esau's heel, which is where he gets his name from. And what Jacob did is he ended up basically tricking his brother Esau out of his birthright. So essentially, he steals Esau's birthright, and then he goes off on his own with all this money. And he falls in love with a girl named Rachel. But then Jacob, who's a trickster and a thief, is tricked by Rachel's father, Laban. And Laban says, if you work for me for 7 years, I'll let you marry my daughter. So Jacob works for Laban for 7 years, and on his wedding night, he is tricked into marrying Rachel's older sister, Leah. And then Laban says, yeah, where we're from, you're really supposed to have the older daughter marry first. And so if you want to marry Rachel, you have to marry Leah first. And then you have to work for me for another 7 years, and then you can marry Rachel. And so Jacob, who's a trickster, has been tricked. And he's basically been working as a slave for 14 years. And he, is owed a certain payment for what he does, taking care of the sheep and being a shepherd and all this stuff. And then Laban steals what he's owed from Jacob and says, oh, well, I'm not going to pay you that. And he tries to trick him. So Jacob, who was a trickster and a thief, has been tricked and has been stolen from. So then what Jacob turns around and does is he tricks Laban and takes everything that he would have been paid over the past 14 years and takes off running. Because he knows, I'm taking all the livestock and the money and whatever, and he's going to hate me, and he's going to be out for blood. So at this point in the story, Jacob is on the run from both his father-in-law and his brother for stealing and tricking. And that's where this story picks up. Genesis chapter 32, verse 22. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Now, this is a really interesting story, and we're going to break this down for you guys. So the first thing I want us to see is that God encounters us in the darkness. God encounters us in the darkness. See, Jacob has been on the run. He's been on the run from his brother, and he's been on the run from his father-in-law. And it is at night, right? And so nighttime, when you read that in the story, is that it should be taken both literally and symbolically, right? So Jacob, he's literally on the run at night. He's under the cover of darkness trying to get away. But it's also symbolic of the fact that he is in a season of darkness. that Jacob is in a dark place, in a low place. This is the lowest place he's ever been at. He's on the run from two people, fearing for his life, looking out for his family and his possessions. And so Jacob, at this point, he's busy making sure that his family and his possessions get away safely. And so he is the last person to leave. So he's making sure he's got 11 kids at this point, and he's got 2 wives and female servants, which that just sounds like a headache. That sounds like 4 headaches. So, he's trying to make sure, okay, you're in charge of this, take this group of cattle and go. All right, you're in charge of this, you've got the money, go. And he's sending them off, so he's the last one, making sure everyone's moved out so they can be on the run. And then what happens is he's probably expecting someone like Esau or someone like Laban to be after him and try and attack him. He's probably expecting that. And instead, he's attacked by a seemingly nameless man out of the darkness. Like, if you're watching this in a movie, like, just imagine, like, Jacob's like, all right, the coast is clear. And then, like, out of the shadows, all of a sudden, you see a hand grab his face and pull him back, and there's a bass drum, and then, like, the sound driver's like, and he's, like, struggling, and they're fighting, and they're wrestling in the darkness, and you don't know what's going on, and the camera's all shaky, Paint that picture in your head. And at this point, because Jacob's been on the run, he has stolen, and he has lied, and he has tricked, and we're supposed to be thinking, and if you were watching this in a movie, you'd be thinking, dude, he's done for. He's finally getting what he deserves. Someone's going to take him down, and he's going to die. And so at this point in the story, I just want to pull this to our lives for a second. Jacob, at this point in the story, he has been in a season of darkness, and maybe you've been in a dark season. Maybe you've been in a place where you've questioned God. Maybe you've been in a place where you have done something that you really regretted or that you're ashamed of. Or maybe you just are in a place where you feel lonely and far off, and you just feel like you've been in a season of darkness. But we know after reading the whole story that this is not just a man who is wrestling with Jacob. God has literally come down and is wrestling with Jacob. And what we need to see here is that God encounters us in the darkness. If you are in a season of darkness, if you're in a low place or a dark place, guess what? That's where God wants to meet you. Now, the second thing I want us to see is that wrestling with God leaves us changed. Wrestling with God leaves us changed. So in verse 25, God dislocates Jacob's hip. And guess what? His hip is not just dislocated for a little bit, it's for the rest of his life. And so when Jacob encounters God, he is permanently changed. And it's not just a physical change in his body, it's that he is undergoing a spiritual transformation by encountering God. But here's the deal. If you keep reading in the story, in verse 26, God talks to him and says, Jacob, let me go. The day's over. You've won. And then Jacob's like, I'm not going to let go. He's like, you have to bless me before I let go of you. And I think that at this point in the story, despite being injured, Jacob does not want to give up. He is relentless. This is a life or death situation. And this, even though God is the one who started this wrestling match with him, Jacob is the one who won't let it end. And I want to paint the picture for you guys. Let's just keep, like, if you're watching this in a movie, just keep this in your head, right? I just want to imagine that Jacob is a character when he says, I won't let you go. that there is so much that he is emoting in his life as he is like fighting and probably yelling at God. Because Jacob is part of God's chosen family to bless the entire world. But Jacob was the youngest. And so he felt like he had to trick and steal to get the blessing from his brother. He had to trick and steal after being tricked and stolen from by his father-in-law. And Jacob knows he's part of this family that God is going to use to bless the world, and yet he's having to steal to get blessed, and he's got all of this anger and frustration and rage and probably just ferociousness of, I'm tired of running, I'm tired of lying and cheating and stealing and tricking. I just want to be blessed. This is what God has said my family's going to do. God, why aren't you doing it? I've been trying to do it my own way, and yet nothing is working, right? He's at this point where all of the stuff that has been going on in his life has led him to this moment. And all of the anger and frustration and rage and sadness comes out in yelling at God, I won't let you go until you bless me. You said you would bless my family. Why isn't this happening? But then in verse 27, God asks him, what is your name? And he says, my name is Jacob. And like I said to y'all before, Jacob means supplanter or heel grabber. He's a liar. He's a thief. He's a cheat. And then God says, your name will no longer be Jacob, but you shall be called Israel. In Hebrew, it's pronounced Yisrael. And what that means, Israel can mean two different things. It has the word to struggle, and then it has the word God in it. So Israel can mean two different things. It can mean that he is someone who has struggled with God, which he certainly did. Jacob has literally been in a wrestling match with God. So he has been struggling with God. He's also been struggling with God, not just physically, but spiritually. His whole life, he has been running and struggling and questioning. God promised to bless the world through his family, and he's not seeing it. God, where are you? God, why did you do this? God, I thought you told me I was going to do this. Why isn't it working? God, aren't you there? Don't you care about the fact that I'm struggling? Now, these are questions that I think all of us ask sometimes. God, why is this happening? God, why are you letting this happen in my life? And it can put us in a place of struggling and questioning God. But Israel can also mean God struggles. Now, God is the one who initiated this fight, right? But God also is struggling with Jacob. Now, have you ever had an experience with your parents or with a teacher or somebody where they're so frustrated with you, and they're just, and they make that sound like, gosh, why are you so frustrated with you? Why won't you listen to me? Has any parents ever said, why won't you listen to me, or yelled or whatever? Yeah. Parents are struggling with you just like you're struggling with them. It's a two-way street here. And what Jacob's new name, Israel, is showing is that while Jacob is struggling with God, God's probably struggling with Jacob too. God's like, dude, I want to bless you. Will you stop running? Stop lying? Stop tricking? I have promised you this. Why won't you listen? Jacob's fighting to be blessed, and God's like, dude, you little turd, stop. I'm trying to bless you. And so Jacob's name is changed to Israel. God has struggled with Jacob, and he chose Jacob. Now, here's the deal. when there is a character in the Bible whose name is changed, names are very important. So when God changes Jacob's name, it's that what it's saying is, Jacob, you will no longer be remembered as the trickster, as the thief, as the heel grabber, as the one who stole and lied. That's not what you're going to be remembered for. You're going to be remembered for being a person who struggled with God but had faith. You're going to be remembered for the faith that you have in God, despite the fact that it's a struggle. And see, I just feel in the story that this is the point when, I just want to encourage you guys that God is not looking for a perfect person. He wants people who will put their faith in God despite the fact that they are imperfect. God's not looking for someone who's got it all together, or someone who's completely super confident and is the strongest and the smartest and the fastest and the whatever. God is looking for someone who, despite their imperfection, despite their weakness, despite their failures, that they would put their faith in God. That's what God is looking for in each and every one of us. He's not looking for us to be the person who's got it all together. He is looking for us to be the person who says, I know I don't have it all together, and I am giving my life to you in faith. I'm trusting you with my life. And here's the last thing. That faith in God doesn't mean that we don't struggle. Faith in God does not mean that we don't struggle. See, God doesn't tell Jacob his name in this story, right? Jacob, after his name is changed, he asks God, tell me your name. And then he responds, why is it that you ask my name? And that's the end of the conversation. And then he blesses him, which is kind of a really indirect and frustrating answer, right? It's like, okay, so what's your name? But it's because Jacob already knows. It's, you're the person who has said that you would bless me my whole life. You are the person who has been pursuing me and who I have been running away from and struggling with ever since I was born. You are God. That's what God is showing him in this answer. And so Jacob, he's blessed at this point, and he names the place where he has this encounter Peniel, which in Hebrew means the face of God, because he literally has seen God face to face, fought with him, and survived. Now that's pretty interesting. Jacob is someone who literally got in a fight with God physically, survived. Now, of course, God was probably going easy on him, right? Because, he's God. But, the thing here is that, all of Jacob's mistakes, all of his doubts, all of his struggles led to a face-to-face encounter with God. Everything wrong that had happened in Jacob's life had a purpose that was leading him to this place right here. He went through all of the hardships, all of the struggles, because God was leading him to have a face-to-face encounter with him. And see, as this happens in the last verse, it shows that the sun rose. And this is, it's literal, but it's also showing symbolically that the dark season that Jacob has been in is ending. And it doesn't mean that Jacob's not going to struggle anymore, but that season is ending, right? So the season is ending, but then it shows Jacob walking away limping because of his hip. Jacob was permanently changed by his encounter with God. The dark season is over, but Jacob still struggles. He still has questions. He still has doubts. And you can actually follow Jacob's story all the way through the Joseph story. Has anyone ever heard the Joseph story growing up in church where Joseph, his brothers sell him off into slavery and they fake his death. And there's part of the story where the brothers all bring some bloodied clothes, the coat of many colors that Joseph was wearing, and they bring it to their father Jacob. And when Jacob sees it, he just cries out, and he's in anguish, and he says, like, they're trying to console him, and he's just so unconsolable, and he says something like, I will go down to hell and meet my son. My life is over. God's blessing has been taken away. My family has been pulled apart. So all that's left for me is to just go to hell and be with my son. That's even after his encounter with God, he has faith in God, and yet he still has low moments in his life where he doubts God. Just because we have faith doesn't mean that we don't struggle and we don't doubt. Just because you believe in God doesn't mean you won't have questions. And I believe that God is big enough to answer your questions. He's big enough to handle your questions. You say, God, this doesn't make sense. God, I don't know what I believe. God, why is this happening? God can handle that stuff. And it is actually through our doubting and our questioning and our struggling that our faith is built. In Hebrews 11:1, it gives us a definition of faith. Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, and it is the conviction of things not seen. Faith is about moving forward even when you can't see, even when you're not 100% sure. And so something that's built into faith is having room for doubt, not being totally sure, but being like, but I know I have faith in God, and I'm going to step forward even though I still have questions. Even though I can't see clearly, I will move forward. You having questions, you having doubts is something that builds your faith. Faith and doubt are not opposites. They work together. And so I want this youth group to be a safe place where we can ask hard questions, because I believe that because we can ask difficult questions, that because we can be open and transparent and honest and about our struggles and all of these things, because of that will help us grow our faith even better and grow in our relationship with God. And so I just want to encourage everyone that's here, if you're questioning God, if you're doubting God, it is okay. And you are in good company with all the other characters in the Bible who doubted and questioned God. I've gone through my own season of doubting and questioning. And yet, time and time again, doubt after doubt after doubt, I come back to the fact that I have confidence that Jesus is Lord, that Jesus is real, that he rose again, that his word is true, that he loves us, that he's taking care of us, and he's coming back. And I just want to encourage you, if you are in a place where you're not sure about what you believe, if you struggle, if you doubt, whatever, you're in a safe place. And I want us as a church to come together in unity and say, hey, we don't have it all figured out, but that's okay because we're in this together. We've got each other's backs, and we know that God's got us. That's the type of youth group that I want this to be. And so as we close tonight, and I know that we're going to go and play some games and have fun, but if you are in a place where you are really questioning God and you have serious doubts, myself and there's several other adult leaders that are here tonight, we would love to talk to you about that. And you don't have to feel ashamed. And so if you're in that place, come talk to one of us. Let's pray.